It might have been one of the strangest things to happen to Lynn, Peabody, and Salem, and nothing like it has happened since. It was a fleeting incident that we talked about in a did you see that kind of way, and not really talked about it any further. It was a singular occurrence that rippled through the Essex County civilians like a benign earthquake. Most people were too distracted to see it going by, and only caught the tail end of it as it scattered down the street. For the human race is never ready for these sudden moments so sublime that they border on horror. In April 2022, Lila Concord happened upon a book of Corbin Chatterton's poems in a moment of pure serendipity. Lila herself was 31 and played the organ at St. Mary's Church in Lynn, Massachusetts. She found the volume of Chatterton's poems in the South Branch of the Peabody Library on a particularly warm day. It was sitting dusty and neglected behind a row of 19th century novels that included Wuthering Heights, Emma, and Far from the Maddening the Crowd. Here, this bygone poet hid behind the statue of the English greats, an American child playing in their shadows. She reached for the volume the way you'd reach to scoop up an injured mourning dove, something which had cooed outside her window that morning. "Oh, I forgot we had that," the elderly librarian cooed, with her voice creaking with apology. Her eyes practically flew through her spectacles and onto the volume with both remembrance and inquiry. "Corbin Chatterton. He was born in Salem, you know, buried somewhere in Piney Grove Cemetery in Lynn." "It was kind of hidden behind the English classics back there," Lila explained. The library took on the brevity of a bazaar. The librarian walked into her own memory to shill out a bargain. "Yes, he was an early romantic. He couldn't quite seem to launch himself into literary stardom like some of the others, though." Lila felt the injured mourning dove twitch its wings within her chest. "Oh, what happened?" "I think it was 1825 that he got very sick and died. It might have been consumption. His poetry lived on through some small presses. I believe this volume is an original from 1823. "May I check it out?" "Honey, I don't think anybody's ever checked out this book. I myself even forgot it was here. I'll let you have it as long as you want." "Thank you. You said he was buried in Pine Grove Cemetery?" "I believe so. Well, you see, originally he was buried in a potter's field somewhere in Danvers, but when Pine Grove was established in 1849, his surviving brother motioned for him to be moved there. His brother worked and worked to afford a proper tombstone for him. I don't remember where in Pine Grove he is exactly, but he's somewhere in there." "Alone?" Lila breathed. "Naturally," the librarian said, and took the book, opened it, and stamped the receipt before sticking it in the first page. It had no prior stamps. "What did the young man write about?" "I haven't flipped through that volume in a while. At first he was obsessed with the sea. Then, I think he began going batty and started writing about love." "One has to be batty to write about love?" Lila snickered to herself. "Batty is Corbin Chatterton." "Ma'am, how old was he?" "I think early to mid-20s. He was an apprentice of some sort before poetry whisked him away. He had no higher education. He was just one of those late symptoms of Shakespeare." Lila, having no response, turned the volume over in her hand, a movement that made her beaded bracelet jingle. "I'll have to take a look at it today. Thank you." "You have a wonderful day, young lady, and enjoy the beautiful weather." She gave a charitable smile while stepping backwards towards the door. "Oh, I will. You too. Bye," and carried Corbin Chatterton back out into the world, into spring weather that the poets and romantics would have gone hysterical for. She took the volume over to Pine Grove Cemetery, the grounds of which were enclosed by a tall cobblestone wall caked in moss. It was quieter than the library. All the tombstones, Madonna statues, and crosses ranged from the kind of stone Medusa's eyes introduced to the polished copper pennies they would never be again. She carried the volume over to the dip in the land where there was a turtle pond, frequented by ducks. She sat down on the lime-green lawn where its rainwater smell welcomed her, and all the turtles sunned themselves on the rocks of the pond. The turtles were such content aliens with black heads that had yellow stripes and eyes concentrated in an outer space serenity. Their content was contagious, and it put Lila in the proper mood to read poetry that was 199 years old. She read some verses aloud to herself as if to make sense of them. They made eternity for only two. We mustn't count the wedding's thunderbolt. They made eternity for me and you. She flipped to the next page. She was careful with her voice, knowing literature and poetry needed a diligent vessel, and that even reading poetry alone was still a responsibility. Her voice was meticulous as she read a new poem to the turtles. Today I set a cooing pigeon free, into the radiant tomorrow flew, a dove to find my lover yet to be. I watched it near the sunset's golden hoop, and joined its luster as the portal closed, to find a woman that I've yet to know. Lila read, and she imagined a young man in a white blouse with loose cuffs, donating a mourning dove to the sky in a celebratory manner. In her mind's eye, she saw the dove, shrinking and shrinking, as it flew away until it vanished, and she thought about the mourning dove that had been cooing outside her window that morning. It ached her, because she could only imagine the majority of this pigeon frere battling the identity crisis of being a silhouette, faint stripes of sunlight to break up the shadows of its figure. She could picture him releasing the bird, and she could picture him being 80% silhouette, even though the poem stated absolutely nothing about it. That was a short one, she said to the turtles. Then she started another poem. I hear the organ, but it's far away. I hear her rosary jingling. Oh, what a gallows is a maiden's wrist, a future knuckle that I've never kissed. The organ music jumps between our times. I hear the thunderclout distort its hymns, which would have played the day our wedding day, a sound no church in Salem claimed to make. I asked the organist to play again and imitate what I heard to him. Oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist, for what he played I did not recognize. But still, sometimes the humming leaves my lips, and though alone, in love I am today. The poem finished, and something came over her. It does exist, she shouted at the open volume. That line, oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist, caused this aggravation in her. She had shouted with the air of being in the thrall of a romantic quarrel, a couple arguing in a kitchen, but she was just in front of the turtle pond in the Pine Grove Cemetery. She had sounded so desperate to get some phantom husband to realize something, but all she did was make the sunning turtles retreat their heads into their shells. The beads of her jangling bracelet when she turned the page. The beads of her bracelet jingled when she turned the page. Beyond the universe's growing pains, the nebulas who take so long to stretch, I think my love is in the future days, and woe that just my ghost will know her breath. She mumbled, the poetry having administered some a sedative to her narrative voice. Corbin, she whined sympathetically under her breath. She brushed her finger over the tan pages, as if to disrupt the seeds out of the poetry. But all the words had already been planted and sprouted. She looked up from her volume at the turtles. They were just starting to poke their heads back out with the languid speed of sunrises. She felt as slow as them. She returned her attention to the poetry and read quietly, no longer reading aloud so as to keep her from shouting again. She ended up remaining quiet for so long that the turtles might have started believing that she was one of the Madonna statues, if a Madonna statue got up, sat down, and took off her shawl. The volume was 121 pages. Some pages had 2 poems on them. Some just had 1. And some poems rambled on for 2 or 3 pages. They weren't all about the strange long-distance relationship the poet had, but some were mundane and about nature, typical poet things. Some were about mortality, were celebrations of Jesus' sacrifice, but most of those 121 pages harbored poems of this strange long-distance romance. And when Lila had time to feel what she had read, the analytical part of her mind started awake, which only deepened her curiosity. "Oh, honey, I said you could keep that book for longer," the librarian cheered when Lila entered the south branch of the Peabody Library the next day. The librarian's face was red and puffy with joy, while Lila, everything about Lila was alive. Beads on her wrist jangled as she stomped, not walked, and her black tresses bounced. She had gotten a little pink from sitting in the sun yesterday, and now there were 121 pages of poetry in her eyes. She looked angry to have not known about the volume sooner. "Have you ever shouted at a book?" Lila asked, to which the librarian shrugged. "Not in here, not since I was a girl, but yes, plenty of times." "When the narrator was wrong about something?" "Honey, I find sometimes the narrator is often right, but we just don't know how to accept it. That's how you know it's a great story. Why, did Corbin Chatterton ruffle your feathers?" Lila didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at the volume and thought of the line that made her shout, "Oh, but the hymn I heard must not exist." She didn't shout now, but felt her unbridled rebuttal echo within her. "I guess he moved me," she admitted. The librarian's smile was enough to make the April sky outside even bluer. "I just needed someone to talk with about this collection," Lila said, in another admission. "Well, I'm certainly not busy now," the librarian said. "Looks like it's just us in here, honey. Why don't we dissect some of it together?" "I'd like that," Lila said, and though separated by age, the two shared a smile. The librarian waddled out from behind the desk, and the two sat at a table with the rustic rainbows of book spines behind them. They went through the poems that affected Lila the most, but the whole time someone was knocking on the door of a cottage in her mind. She did her best to ignore it because she wanted to be polite, and nod while the librarian read a poem, gave her 2 cents on it, and then read and analyzed another. "I think this one summarizes Corbin's feelings of how the realization of expectation is constant. See here, a string in time, my finger interrupts. I feel, not hear, but feel, the summer air I pluck. Geez, that's beautiful, isn't it?" "It is," Lila agreed, but where did that pride in her voice come from? "Play on, the great nothing I wrote myself. Today's tranquility will be enough," the librarian read. "The pointer finger plucks, the middle plucks, and then sometimes it twitches in my thumb. Ah, see, I love that." The librarian held up her hands and wiggled her fingers, drawing a pleasant chuckle from Lila. "Is this the only work of his you have? I can call the main branch and see if there are any of his other collections, but yes, as far as I know, you are in possession of the only Corbin Chatterton work we have in the South Branch. Very interesting, Lila said, thoughtfully, her eyes consulting the closed volume on the table. Did you have any idea of where he's buried? No, honey. I'm sorry to say I don't. As I said before, he's in Pine Grove, but I'm not sure which section or lot he's in. I think I'm going to go look for him. The librarian sounded very sorry that she had to laugh. Honey, there's almost 100,000 people buried there. That place is over 80 acres. And how many poets are buried there? This made the librarian think. She spoke for a moment and considered. I will say you can veer from the military section, as I do know he didn't serve. It'll most likely be an old tombstone. Not sure how legible the name and the date will be, or if there will even be a name on it. Are you sure you want to do this, honey? I feel like I have to know after reading him, Lila said, but then she snickered, and the snicker seemed to be hastily trying to fasten a mask over her face. She dipped her head and looked back down at the closed volume. Where are you, Corbin? Lila asked herself that afternoon while she was walking through Pine Grove with a pen and a red notebook in hand, which she was planning to write a composition in. But she didn't want to start writing it until she found the poet's grave. Maybe creativity was equaled by death, and she wouldn't be able to find him. The only good thing was that it was a beautiful spring day, and the smell of freshly cut cemetery lawn dispelled the grass's earthy breath. She applied sunblock on her shoulders so that the smell was there, but the cold smell of the sunblock had gotten shy in the presence of the smell of grass. She walked and looked. She passed down the rows of tombstones, walked the hills, and ignored the mopey-headed trees that tried tempting her with their shade. The sheer amount of tombstones quieted her, and the more she walked, the more she began to feel that this one cemetery seemed bigger than Massachusetts itself. It also distorted her sense of time after seeing the collection of dates, all embedded in stone like 1,000 different Chinese fortunes. But they all ended up saying the same thing, which was, this person was born, and then they died, and this person was born, and then they died. The numerical possibilities of her own species almost put her in a trance, would have made her forget what she was looking for, but just as she had found the volume by chance, that's how she found his grave. It was uphill, standing short with castle-like posture. Corbin Chatterton, 1801 to 1825, read the tombstone. The letters were only visible because they had been carved, and the wrinkles on the tombstone had not caught up with the masonry yet. Atop the hill was a large oak with branches that sprawled out to form an umbrella over the daycare of tombstones. Corbin's tombstone was 80% shadows, broken up by 20% sunlight that managed to cut through the leaves. It was comforting to know that his tombstone had a ballet of sunlight and shadows to play on it all this time. Lila took a breath and sat down beside Corbin's tombstone, opening up her notebook and beginning to write, humming different notes and progressions to herself quietly so as not to disturb the dead. She wrote many movements and variations of the same movement, humming to herself and making corrections along the way, sometimes even starting all over again. What she was doing was composing more than a poem. Poetry is for the conscious, music is for the subconscious, thus explaining the almost torpid state she entered into, while inspiration whisked her away, her pen the whip that kept the steed in flight. That's what Corbin would say. She practiced on the keyboard in her room that night, making corrections and changes to her sonata along the way. Halfway through the composition, she decided on titling it as Corbin's Sonata. Its melodic and somber tones were hindered by the prissy range of her keyboard, but she knew it would sound all the better on the organ in St. Mary's. Still, even when she played it on the keyboard at 3 in the morning, she couldn't help but remember how she had imagined the silhouette of the man, striped in sunset orange, that almost revealed his identity, releasing a morning dove up into the sky. Corbin might have described the sonata as having come from a sunset. It sounded like a triumphant, yet subtle, happy ending to a life cut short. "Father Calabash, do you mind if I try something out on the organ today?" she asked the next day, while standing in the belly of St. Mary's. Father Calabash was in his black cassock with the white necktie, his eyes piercing, his skin pale, his voice of some Central European and slightly vampiric origin. Father Calabash drew his pale aurora borealis eyes up to the indoor balcony of the church, where the organ was. Its brass pipes and their many frowns were always quite the thing to see, and the machine always had monstrous promise to it. "Why, sure, I don't see why not, Miss Concord. Is it practice you seek?" said the priest with the Dunkin' coffee on his breath. She hesitated, almost dropping her red notebook. "I wanted to try writing something." Oh! Well, I was about to go out and trim some of the bushes in the parking lot, but if you want someone to give it a listen, I'm good, Father," she said warmly. "I don't want to keep you. I will most likely be able to hear it out there anyway," he said, and patted her shoulder before bundling out of the church, ready to grass stain his black pants. Lila turned behind the confession booth and took a flight of stairs that were in a cramped chute. The church's anatomy was that of wood, and not of brilliant marble and granite that are the colors of far-off temples. She proceeded to the organ like it was any other morning in Mass, and sat down. Opening up her notebook before her, there was more opportunity in an organ than any piano or keyboard, and the title she had written above the sonata seemed so promising aboard the steampunk-style instrument. Corbin's Sonata. That moment, when her hands hovered down towards the keys, was such a detrimental silence. It was like sitting in the theater and truly not being able to determine the ending of the movie. For one reason or another, her fingers hovered there for a moment. She might have imagined the man who was almost silhouette-elating underneath an orange watercolor sky. Maybe sunsets were redder back when the tragedy of Salem was fresher in the sky. However, the sky was bright blue that day in Lynn. Her fingers pressed down on the corresponding keys, and immediately the pipes came to life. It was like a resurrection for the wrongly dead. The swarm was a swarm that seemed to have started nowhere. It was in a hurry through Essex County, tens of thousands of mournful doves, all in a violent commute, not just above the streets, but through them. A lady who had been walking her little dog ducked and laid on her stomach when the swarm passed. All their wings were so fast and small that it was amazing that wings as thin as playing cards could let such plump doves accelerate the way they did. Cars lurched to respective stops in that intersection that the witch house in Salem is. The swarm was such a brief reflection on their windshields. From here, the swarm ascended, but seemed indifferent to flying too high. No, these birds' business was not in the sky. The swarm slithered and winded through residential neighborhoods, some where nobody saw them, and some where people did. They curved up and over buildings when they had to, but always came curving back down, slinking in roller coaster finesse to wherever they were going. The librarian in the South Branch Peabody Library was too involved in the book she was reading to see the blur traffic past the window, but its sound alerted her, and she looked up from her book. So did a couple of other patrons. But too late. Horns honked. A child reached out of his stroller and giggled with the 2 bubbling teeth it had. Dogs yipped, not out of malice, but out of an absurd understanding with nature. The falcons that hid in the trees stayed themselves from chasing the swarm. Seagulls in many pothole-infested parking lots remained grounded. Father Calabasas was intrigued with the sound that was coming from his church while he stooped over to weed a strip of mulch from which some hedges grew. It enhanced his gardening duties. The music sounded as misunderstood as toccata and fugue, triumphant as 99 red balloons, and as tickling as Vivaldi. And Lila's fingers tickled the keys as if she had been playing it all this time. Perhaps the song was always in her. That's why she played it so well. She just had to write it down for it to exist. Exist? It did exist. Her pleading shouts at the turtle pond had been worthwhile. The more the sound came out of the church with the attitude of a newly wedded couple, and the more Father Calabas progressed down the rows of hedges, the more he wished that the piece was something that he could play in his car. He wished he had it to listen to on his way to Dunk's, on his way to church, on his way to the house of the elderly, when supplying communion. Something cut the air. A shadow entered down the street that St. Mary's was on, and Father Calabasas turned to see the swarm of mourning doves shooting towards the church. Being not afraid, he stood still and watched the swarm fill the space between houses, the sounds of all those wings unfolding and folding the air. The swarm was as long as an unwound fingerprint, and it took a while for the entire swarm to amalgamate around St. Mary's. It created an ever-turning vortex around it, flying, flying, flying in a circle. When the swarm was finished arriving, Father Calabasas stepped back and craned his neck, watching the tornado of mourning doves churn. They all flew so fast, but so eloquently, without crashing into one another, that it seemed they had the grace of fighter jets. Oh, but this was a peaceful thing. The priest watched with his jaw open until Corbin's sonata ended in the sorrowful chuckle of some apologetic but happy notes, and the swarm started uncoiling itself from the church. This took some time as well, given the length of the swarm, but eventually the church was rid of it, and the swarm ascended until it became faint as smoke, growing smaller and smaller until Father Calabasas saw nothing but a blue April sky. But how strange it was to see one mourning dove falling out of the air, its wings working rapidly to cool its re-entry. It landed on a telephone wire and looked down at the priest. It looked at him and cooed like a curious cat. "Oh, your wings must be tired, little friend," the priest said, despite the distance between him and the telephone wire. And just like that, it ended. Lila's fingers retreating from the keys. The only sound in the church was the faint jingle of the beads on her wrist. Had she seen the swarm outside the stained glass window? I'm not sure. We have to leave her now, but I think she sensed us. Part of her must have heard our wings berating the air and sending feathery winds against the church. I saw a swarm of mourning doves crusade in unison into the candle cloud. Their light wings have such a sky to break, their little wings against their bellies pound. A stanza by Corbin Chatterton, 1823. Have you ever wondered how hot the mascots at Walt Disney World must get in the humid Florida air? Or how they can dance around and wave without ever seeming to get tired? I never really paid much attention to it. I always wanted to believe it was just the Disneyland magic that kept those poor people in those burning costumes going. But like most things, it's just not that simple. It was the summer of 2006. I was 14 at the time. I took a well-deserved vacation with my family down to Florida to have a magical vacation at the happiest place on earth. Along with my mom, my sister, and of course me, was my Uncle Rick. He lived in Florida, so it wasn't uncommon for him to accompany us on a trip down to Disney World. We visited Disneyland often because it was only about a 5-hour drive from our home in Phoenix, Arizona. So as you can imagine, it was always a big treat for us to fly down to Florida. Me, my mom, and my sister were all huge Disney fans. And when I say huge, I mean huge. Disney memorabilia all over our home, seeing Disney movies on opening night or day. Anything Disney, we've done it. It's one of the reasons this story is so painful to tell, along with many others. My Uncle Rick, on the other hand, wasn't such a big Disney buff. In fact, he was the opposite. He was very religious, always rambling on about stories of the good old days when he was a teacher at a Sunday school. Uncle Rick was significantly older than my mom. They were 12 years apart, I think. I was never a religious kid, nor am I now, but that didn't affect my relationship with my Uncle Rick. He was a great man, always happy, funny. He just had something about him that made everyone who knew him smile when they brought him up. I couldn't have asked for a better man to be my mother's brother. My Uncle Rick had always had his likes and dislikes about Disney World. His dislikes consisting of the unnatural happiness of the people there, the crowds, the loud sounds, the rides. I don't know how he couldn't have loved Pirates of the Caribbean, and especially the way the people in those mascot costumes had to stand there for extended periods of time in the blazing heat, just so the people could get a picture with them. I tried to explain to him that it was their job, and that they weren't in any danger, but he would always find a way to counter my argument. Oh, and his likes consisted of one thing, the turkey legs, even though he would still complain about how they were overpriced. He never seemed pleased when we went to Disney World. It was obvious the only reason he was there was because he wanted to spend time with us. This particular trip to Disney World was different, though. Everything was fine and dandy, up until we pulled up to the Disney World gates that greet you at the entrance to the Disney property. I noticed that he had an uneasy look on his face as we passed under them, and then he got unusually quiet, up until we had already parked and left the car. Instead of talking about the usual stories of his good old days, he began to talk about a much darker subject. Hell. It took me off guard, considering he never really brought up the subject unless he was telling us not to say it. I just looked at him as he went on talking about the suffering that goes on down there, and how he hopes we never have to experience anything like that. Then my mom, when she overheard his rambling, abruptly ordered him to cut it out and just be happy that you're here. I'd never heard my Uncle Rick talk like that. He'd always been so joyful. I could tell from the tone in his voice that he was genuinely concerned, but I just couldn't figure out what had gotten into him to make him so upset. I also couldn't get what he said out of my head. I don't want you to ever experience suffering like that. I didn't know what he meant. He seemed very unlike himself. He was sad, not frustrated, not annoyed, just sad. I kept asking him what was wrong, but he just looked the other way and ignored me. We'd been in the Magic Kingdom for about an hour and a half, though I wasn't able to enjoy any of it, considering I was concerned for Uncle Rick the whole time, and we had gone on a few rides. Uncle Rick usually tends to go on the rides with us, even though he doesn't exactly enjoy them, but this time he refused to go on any, and he just sat near the exit, waiting for us to get off. We were about to go on the Haunted Mansion when I decided I'd hold off and sit down with Rick. I took a seat next to him and we just sat there quietly for about half an hour. If you've ever been to Disneyland or Disney World, then you know how long the lines get. Finally, he muttered something to me. "What?" I said, trying to direct my focus on him. "I was told something bad would happen today." I could barely understand his quiet voice over all the commotion around us. "What? By who?" I said. "Something unholy," he said, as the tears rolled down his cheeks. My heart dropped. This isn't my usual Uncle Rick talking. This Uncle Rick was just a sad, miserable shell of himself. When my sister and my mom finally got off the ride, I remember looking up and seeing my joyful mother staring down at me. I'd been so genuinely sad that my Uncle Rick was so miserable that I too had been crying, though I didn't even notice until my mom shouted at me. "Seriously? You too? You have got to be kidding me. Do you know how much goddamn money I spent at this place just so you two can have a good time?" That's when I realized that I was in the happiest place on earth and I was still crying like a baby. I stood up and said, "You're right. Let's go ride Space Mountain. You coming, Uncle Rick?" I remember the look he gave me. It was a look of absolute sorrow. I felt guilty as he slowly pried himself from the bench. On our way to Space Mountain, we came across a Mickey Mouse mascot, giving out autographs and taking photos with excited children. My sister, who was younger than I was, begged my mom to get a picture with Mickey. My mom gave in and we walked over. I kept looking over my shoulder to check on Uncle Rick, whose pace slowed as we approached the mascot. My mom and sister stood in line, eager to get a picture with Mickey. I, on the other hand, was still about 10 feet from them, waiting for Uncle Rick. I felt almost angry at my mom for not sympathizing with her own brother, even though something was obviously wrong with him. I stood there waiting for him when he finally caught up as I grabbed his hand, trying to assist him over. But as our palms met, I noticed that his hand was shockingly cold. I gasped as I jerked my hand away in shock. "Uncle Rick, are you okay?" I said to him in a shaky voice. He just stared at me. His face was different than I'd ever seen it before. It didn't look like my Uncle Rick at all. It looked like the epitome of misery. I wanted to break down crying. I had never seen such a disturbing sight in my life, and not disturbing in a way that made me frightened. It was disturbing in a way that affected me as a person, in a way that I know I'll never be able to forget. I ran over to my mom and grabbed her arm. "We need to leave now." She just looked at me with a puzzled look on her face. "No, we don't. Your uncle's fine. He just..." She stopped mid-sentence and looked behind me with a shocked look on her face. I was hesitant to turn around because by the look on her face, I knew what I was about to see was going to be bad. I never could have imagined how bad it was going to be. I finally convinced myself to turn around. Before me, I saw Uncle Rick, standing maybe 15 feet away. He was looking at the Mickey mascot, and the Mickey was looking back at him. That's when I noticed that the Mickey's body was facing the opposite direction of the Mickey's head. I couldn't understand why the mascot looked like that. Wouldn't the Disney employees have put a stop to it? What was happening? That's when it happened. In an instant, the Mickey mascot let out a deafening sound that resembled 1,000 people screaming. I cupped my ears, trying to drown out the noise, but it was no use. Then, just as soon as it started, the noise stopped. I looked up, and the Mickey was no more than 2 feet from my face. Its face was distorted, It had black eyes with small white pupils, rat-like front teeth, surrounded by what looked like hundreds of bloody human teeth filling the gums of the Mickey mouth. The skin of the mascot was gray. The material looked aged and rotten. Then I heard it, in a voice that sounded like 1,000 people talking at once. "We are but puppets, nothing more than a test for what's to come." I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I could only watch as, in the blink of an eye, the Mickey was standing in front of my Uncle Rick. The mascot head was slowly lifted off the body by some unseen force. I saw a reddish-black liquid pour out of the neck and spill down the body of the mascot. My Uncle Rick started screaming bloody murder. Then something happened. I'm not sure what. I turned my head and covered my ears in an attempt to shield myself from what was happening to my Uncle Rick. Then I woke up in a cold sweat on the concrete as my family and some Disney cast members crowded around me. I saw my Uncle Rick looking down at me with concern in his eyes. I jolted to my feet and grabbed my uncle by the arm. "Please, Rick, we need to go, please." He placed his hand on mine. It was warm again. He told me with a smile on his face that everything was okay. I just fainted from the heat. I know I didn't faint. It took me a few seconds to come to reality. When I did, I hugged my Uncle Rick like I'd never hugged anybody before. I sat down in a cast members only area to cool down, even though I wasn't really that hot. They gave me some water and told me to relax. The paramedics would be there soon. I assured them I was fine, mainly because I wanted to get the hell out of here. But my efforts were useless. The paramedics arrived and I was taken to the nearest emergency room. The nurse did some tests and talked to the doctor for a while. I was fine. Nothing was wrong with me. I know what I saw was real. I wouldn't just imagine that. Even if I did, nothing imaginary could be that real. I laid in the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling for a couple of hours. That's when it occurred to me. The place that they took me to sit down after I supposedly fainted was one of the mascot exits and entries. I felt cold when I recalled seeing a reddish-black puddle on the floor in the middle of the entrance with a wet floor sign over it. That was the same liquid I saw come out of the costume. My heart was racing and my palms were sweating. I was trying to convince myself that they were right, and somehow I did faint. It was all imaginary. But then, why the hell was that liquid on the floor? I was starting to panic when my mom slowly walked into the room. Her cheeks were drenched in tears and her hands were filled with tissues. I stopped dead in my tracks. I don't know how, but I knew. I knew something had happened to Uncle Rick. She sat down in a chair next to my bed and put her hand in mine. She told me what had happened. Every word felt like a knife, sinking deeper into my heart. My uncle had shot himself that night. He had a Bible clenched in his hand when he did it. He was dead. I knew why, but nobody else would. A happy, joyful man like him doesn't just decide he wants to blow his brains out one night. No, something happened to him. The mascot did something to him that I didn't see because I looked away. I feel like if I hadn't looked away, I could have saved him somehow. But I can't now. He's dead. I don't have anything to do with Disney anymore. When I moved out of my mom's house, I burned everything Disney I owned. I refused to go back there. I don't know what I saw that day, even though I can still see it clear as day. I feel sick every time I think about what happened. I don't look for answers. I never have. I don't want to know what it was. I think knowing would be 1,000 times worse than remaining clueless. All I know is that it seems as if there's something other than the fun atmosphere or the job benefits that keeps people working at Disney. Maybe there's something more to life in general. Something we'll never understand until we're dead. Maybe I did just faint, though. Maybe it was just a costume. It was a rainy Saturday morning, and I could hear it tapping against my window. I looked up from my laptop and let out a soft sigh. The sound was somewhat annoying, yet also oddly soothing, and I thought it might help me focus on the history essay I needed to finish for school. As I kept typing away on my laptop, I suddenly heard yelling. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, and groaned quietly to myself. Not again. I got up from my bed and walked out of my room, heading down the hall and downstairs, where the yelling grew louder. As I turned the corner, I spotted my mom and my older brother Mark in the living room, arguing about something. "Mom, I already told you I'm sorry. I should have called to let you know I'd be home late. I didn't realize that party would go on until 1 in the morning. And I've already told you that I don't like you or your brother being out that late. Something terrible could happen to you. For heaven's sake, you could have been killed or kidnapped, Marcus." Mom and Mark continued their argument, clearly oblivious to my presence. I sighed softly, contemplating whether to just turn around and let them sort it out. Even though I was 25 and Mark was 27, Mom still treated us like children. She insisted we stay with her until we were both 30, which infuriated us. I felt a surge of frustration rising within me, and I cleared my throat as loudly as I could, causing Mom and Mark to stop arguing. They both turned to look at me. "Oh my goodness, Daniel, I'm so sorry. Did we interrupt your studying?" Mom asked, sounding genuinely concerned. "I've been attempting to study for more than an hour, but I can't concentrate with you two bickering like children." Mark's face flushed a deep red. I could tell he was embarrassed about the situation, yet he was still angry with Mom and couldn't cease his argument until he had expressed everything he wanted to say. "We're sorry, sweetheart. I'm just trying to explain to your brother that staying out too late is unwise," Mom said. I've always disliked that particular trait in Mom. She's such a worrywart. If that's the right term, I mean, because she frets over everything, even the most trivial matters. "You know what? I'll just head to the library. Maybe I can finish my essay there, and hopefully there won't be anyone trying to tear each other apart." I nearly yelled the last part out of frustration as I turned and stormed back upstairs to my room so I could grab my things. As I shoved my laptop and notebook into my bag, I muttered under my breath about the constant fighting and how I was being treated like a child. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a knock on my bedroom door. I turned to see Mark leaning against the frame. I hadn't even noticed him come up behind me. "Let me guess. Mom sent you up here to stop me from heading to the library," I remarked, glancing at him. "Yep. She believes it's a terrible idea for you to go outside in this rainstorm because you might get sick or even struck by lightning, which is ridiculous, but she wouldn't listen when I told her that." I rolled my eyes and plopped down on my bed, slipping on my shoes and ensuring the straps were snug, but not so tight that they would cut into my feet. Honestly, I don't care what the worrywart or you think. I'm going to the library to finish my damn history essay without having to listen to another argument from either of you. Now, if you could do me a favor and tell Mom I'll be back before dinner, that'd be great, I retorted. Before my brother could respond, I got up, tossed my bag over my shoulder, and pushed past him, making my way downstairs to the main part of the house. Mom was there, clearly waiting for me. I raised my hand to signal that I didn't want to hear the lecture and assured her I'd be home by dinner, before stepping out onto the porch. The only sound I could hear was the rain and the rumbling thunder. I let out a soft sigh, double-checking that my bag was securely closed, then pulled up my hood and set off toward the city library. Who would have thought a library would be open on the weekend? After a few minutes of walking along the rain-soaked street, feeling the droplets on my head and back, I found myself in front of the library, a smile creeping onto my face. The library always brought me joy. There was something magical about the aroma of aged paper and the soft murmurs of books that captivated me. As I entered the library, I greeted the woman at the front desk. She returned my greeting with a smile, though I could sense she wasn't thrilled to see me looking so drenched. I located a spot to settle down, and a few minutes later my belongings were spread out on the desk as I began working on my essay. In fact, my laptop remained tucked away in my bag while I attempted to proofread my notes before transferring them. I sighed quietly, frustrated that nothing seemed to make sense, and realized I needed more assistance. I got up and approached the front desk, inquiring if there were any history encyclopedias available that could aid me in my school essay. She informed me that all the history encyclopedias were located in the back corner of the library, and advised me to be cautious while I was there, since some of the books were quite old. I nodded in agreement and made my way to the back corner. Upon arrival, I began to sift through the aisles, but all the books appeared either dull, or I was certain they wouldn't be of any assistance to me. Before long, I turned a corner and stumbled upon a section I had never seen before. It looked rather intimidating, as the overhead light was flickering and swaying back and forth. I noticed a layer of dust on the shelf, and a few bugs scurried away from my shadow, rushing past me. I glanced at all the encyclopedias and couldn't help but smile. Perhaps one of these could be useful, I thought, grinning. I began to pull encyclopedias off the shelf, examining their covers. Some of them I had read previously, while others were quite old, likely published when my mom was my age. As I pushed one of the encyclopedias aside, something heavy tumbled down on my foot, causing me to cry out in pain. I quickly slapped a hand over my mouth, not wanting to disrupt the tranquility. I looked down and saw a thick brown book lying on the ground. I bent down to pick it up and noticed it lacked any library codes or markings indicating ownership. However, I soon realized how worn and tattered it was. The spine was cracked. I dusted off the cover and read the title, which sent a shiver down my spine. Prophetic Pages. I opened the book and began flipping through the pages, each one yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes and strange symbols that seemed to dance before my eyes. As I continued to flip through the pages, I discovered that each one contained a detailed entry about the life and death of an individual. It struck me that the names were eerily familiar. They were all people I knew, friends, family, acquaintances. I was in disbelief over what I was holding. When I turned the next page, I nearly dropped the book on my foot again. Timothy Green, age 23, died in a car accident on April 15th, 2003. This page was dedicated to my childhood best friend, Timothy, or Tim as I had called him. April 15th was tomorrow, and I could feel my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I closed the book, trying to convince myself that this was just a cruel joke. I glanced around the library, half expecting someone to jump out and shout, "Gotcha!" But the aisles were empty. The only sound was the rain, tapping against the nearby window. That and my heavy breathing. I came to the realization that I had to hurry home to call Tim and alert him about what was going to happen. I tucked the strange book under my arm and dashed back to my desk where my belongings were. A few minutes later, I found myself sprinting down the street, as fast as a guy who mainly plays video games and practices the trumpet can manage. I began to ponder a multitude of thoughts. Was any of this real? Was the book some sort of cursed object that the library had been concealing? Upon arriving home, I rushed past Mark and Mom, who were in the kitchen preparing dinner. Thankfully, I didn't hear them arguing, but I didn't have the luxury of time to deal with that right now. Once I reached my room, I tossed my bag and the Prophetic Pages book onto my desk. Then I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. Without delay, I dialed Tim's number, my fingers trembling as the phone rang and rang. Just when I thought he wouldn't pick up, I heard his voice on the other end. "Dude, you need to listen to me. This is really important. Are you planning to go out tonight?" I asked him. Timothy excitedly explained that he was actually going to see a new horror movie that had just been released, and suggested I join him if I were done being Mr. History. I took a deep breath and pleaded with him to stay home, urging him not to drive anywhere and to just remain safe at home. Tim immediately laughed, teasing me for turning into my mother. I was on the verge of telling him about the peculiar book I discovered at the library, but I knew he wouldn't believe me. Just then I heard Mom calling my name, so I told Tim I had to go, and he hung up. I let out a sigh before glancing down at prophetic pages. Deep down, I feared it might already be too late for my childhood best friend. I heard Mom calling me again, so I set the phone back on the nightstand. I then walked out of my room and saw Mom standing at the foot of the stairs. She informed me that dinner was ready, and that she'd been calling me for a couple of minutes now, urging me to come downstairs before the food got cold. At the table, I sat there, pushing my peas around my plate with a fork, while Mom and Mark were engaged in conversation. But I couldn't focus on them. My mind was occupied with thoughts of the dangerous book from the library, Tim's disbelief, and the looming possibility of losing my best friend, either tomorrow or maybe even tonight. "Hey, little brother, what's up with you?" Mark inquired. I jumped in my seat, nearly falling out as I managed to keep my composure, because I knew if I hit the ground, Mom would treat me like a baby. "Oh, I'm just pondering my history essay. I found some intriguing information at the library, and I think it'll help me score a good grade." I couldn't share the details of that so-called death book because neither of them would believe me, especially after Tim hadn't believed me when I warned him about his fate. After dinner, I headed back to my room, sat on my bed, grabbed the book, and flipped to the page detailing Tim's death. I kept staring at it, wondering if it was real or if I could tear the page out and somehow prevent it from happening, like some kind of paradox. Then I remembered that this book was indeed from the library, and I had borrowed it. Yet it lacked any library barcodes or scanner tags, so perhaps it didn't actually belong to the library. I let out a soft sigh before placing the book on my nightstand and getting ready for bed. And soon I was laying there in the dark, thinking about Tim and the terrible car accident that awaited him on April 15th. The next day, as I woke up, sunlight streamed through the window. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and yawned. Instantly, I turned around, glancing at my phone, my thoughts immediately drifting to Tim. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I quickly grabbed my phone and texted him, checking if he was all right and if he'd enjoyed the movie. I anticipated a swift response, but there was nothing. Throughout the day, I kept waiting for Tim to either call or text me, but still no reply came. Panic began to creep in, and I muttered a frustrated curse under my breath. I made the decision to call Tim's home phone. However, instead of him picking up, it was his mother. When I inquired about Timothy's whereabouts, I heard her gasp in horror. She informed me that Tim had been involved in a car accident while driving to the grocery store, and the paramedics said he didn't survive. In that moment, I felt my legs buckle beneath me. I leaned against the wall, sliding down it until I collapsed on the floor. The prophetic pages had spoken the truth, and it had come to pass. The book had foretold his death, and despite my efforts, I couldn't save my best friend from dying. The very next day, I found myself back at the library, involved in a fog of sorrow and disbelief, desperate to comprehend what had happened. I settled into the same desk as before, retrieving the book from my bag, gazing at it before I began to leaf through the yellowed pages once again. Each page contained a meticulous account of the life and death of various individuals. Some were familiar to me, while others weren't. Yet each entry represented a friend or a family member that would meet their end in a unique circumstance, all described in vivid detail. As I continued to turn the pages, I suddenly halted on one that sent a chill through my hands, almost compelling me to hurl the book across the room. Jessica Carter, age 25, dies from an aneurysm on April 16, 2003. In that moment, I understood that this page detailed the death of my girlfriend, Jessica. A shiver coursed through me as I recalled the last time I saw her. We were at the coffee shop, sharing laughter over something silly. Without hesitation, I jumped up, stuffed the book in my bag, and fished my phone out of my pocket to dial Jessica's number. "Hey, Daniel, what's up? I'm at work right now." "Listen, whatever you're doing, you need to stop or head home. You're in danger." I rushed to explain about the book I discovered in the library, detailing how it revealed the death of all my friends and family, including her. I then told her I found Tim's name in the book, and that he died in a car accident yesterday, just as the book had predicted, for that exact date. "Whoa, Daniel, I think you've been watching too many horror movies. But when you get to the restaurant, at least bring me that so-called mystical book you have," Jessica said before hanging up. I felt an urge to scream in the emptiness. I urged my feet to run, wishing I had my car or something quicker than my clumsy feet. When I finally reached the restaurant, I doubled over, gasping for breath. As I looked up, I saw a crowd gathering around the entrance, and confusion washed over me. Were they having a sale, or was there a fight going on? I was indifferent to the commotion. My only focus was finding Jessica to show her the book. I squeezed through the throng and entered the restaurant when I noticed paramedics and medical personnel, along with an area cordoned off by barriers. I couldn't see what was happening due to another crowd blocking my view, so I tapped on an old man, and he turned around, concern etched on his face. "Sir, what's going on?" "One of the workers just collapsed, and the paramedics think she's dead," he replied. The moment he mentioned she, my heart plummeted. I pushed through the crowd, and there on the ground, eyes closed and lifeless, lay Jessica. "No, Jessica!" I yelled, my voice echoing in the chaos. Instantly, the paramedics and medical staff turned to me. One approached and asked if I knew her. I told her I was Jessica's boyfriend, that I'd just spoken to her on the phone moments ago, urging her to leave work because it wasn't safe. I was rambling, overwhelmed, and I stopped when the paramedic placed her hand on my shoulder. "Young man, it's okay. You should know what happened. Your girlfriend has died from an aneurysm. There was nothing we could do to save her. I'm so sorry." The book felt like a dark oracle, revealing its grim secrets, and I thought about showing it to the woman, but if I did, she would likely bombard me with questions I couldn't answer. So I thanked her, and without another word, pushed past everyone and exited the restaurant, furious that this cursed book had claimed yet another person I loved. Weeks later, the unsettling pattern persisted. Each page revealed the demise of a victim who was more familiar to me than Jessica. I'd become a captive of the book, unable to resist the allure of its sinister knowledge. I felt as if it understood my sorrow, with the ink appearing darker on every page. Then I stumbled upon a page that shattered my heart into countless fragments upon seeing the name. Marcus Roberts, age 27, died of a heart attack on April 30th, 2003. I realized that was tonight, and I leapt out of bed, rushing to my brother's room where I found him lacing up his shoes. "Dude, where are you going? It's almost 9 o'clock at night." "Can't sleep. Thinking about going for a late night run. Be back soon." I pleaded with him not to venture out into the night, insisting it was too perilous. Mark chuckled, saying I was becoming like Mom, but I was just terrified of losing my brother. After an hour passed, I found myself in the kitchen, assisting Mom in preparing her renowned double chocolate chip cookies, and I could see that she appeared anxious about something. I inquired about what was troubling her, and she revealed that Mark had not returned from his walk, nor had he sent her a message, as he had promised to do when he came back home. I sensed what was about to unfold, and I knew I had to intervene. I looked at Mom and told her I needed to take care of something, to which she simply nodded in agreement. Without another word, I quickly put on my jacket and shoes. Then I dashed out of the house. My breath came in quick, uneven gasps as I sprinted towards the park, Mark's favorite place to walk. As I neared the park, I spotted a figure lurking in the shadows, and my heart raced in my chest. When I turned the corner, I found him lying on the ground, clutching his chest. "Mark!" I yelled. I hurried to my brother, but deep down I already knew it was too late for him. The dreadful book had taken yet another victim, and this time it was my brother. I was descending into madness. First, my 2 friends were taken from me, then my brother. The loss of my loved ones was a heavy burden to my emotions. That's when an idea struck me. I seized the book and made my way back to the library, one last time, desperate for answers. The main librarian, an elderly woman, looked up at me with her piercing green eyes when I came in. "What is this book? Why is it causing all of this?" I slammed the prophetic pages onto the desk. Initially, the lady remained silent, but as she took the book and examined it, her expression shifted, and she regarded me with a serious look. "Young man, where did you come across this book?" "I was here searching for a history encyclopedia when this book fell off the shelf and landed on my foot. But you still haven't answered my question. What is this book?" "That's the prophetic pages. It has always existed, young man. It chronicles the lives that are intertwined with yours, and predicts not only death, but also the weight of choice and the paths we take." "This isn't a choice, it's a curse," I shouted in frustration. "Perhaps it is, or perhaps it isn't. But understand this, that book only reveals what is already destined. It's not the cause, but a reflection of the choices you've made and the connections you've established." I took a step back, my mind racing. Had I somehow cursed all of these people, my loved ones, without even realizing it? Was I in some way accountable for the choices they made or the paths they chose? "Can I change this? Is there any way to stop it?" I inquired. "The only way to put an end to this situation is to cut off the connections, but it comes at a cost, young man." Her words seemed to penetrate deep within me, and without uttering a word, I turned away from the desk, leaving the book behind in the library. I came to realize that I had to create distance from everybody I cared about. I needed to sever ties with them, even though it felt like a betrayal. It was the only way to protect them. In the following weeks, I dedicated my days and nights to solitude. Whenever I encountered someone I recognized, I would steer clear of them, and I ignored their calls and messages. It was torturous, yet it brought a sense of relief as I observed that no one around me was perishing, and I felt assured that my loved ones were safe. Then one day, as I went to my bedroom to indulge in some video games, I discovered the prophetic pages lying on my bed. I felt as if I could melt into a puddle. I hurried over to it, picked it up, and as I examined the cover, my hands trembled while I opened the book and flipped straight to the last page. To my surprise, it was entirely blank, leaving me puzzled. Recalling what the librarian had said, I touched the paper and watched in amazement as the information began to materialize before my eyes. When I saw the name of the next person destined to die, my jaw dropped in disbelief. Daniel Roberts, 25 years old, passed away from loneliness on May 15th, 2003. The book slipped from my grasp. That date was tomorrow. I couldn't fathom it. I felt as if I might either vomit or weep like a child. The realization hit me like a massive wave. I'd been so focused on saving my friends and loved ones that I had unwittingly sealed my doom. I needed to cut myself entirely from everybody, even my mother, who was thankfully still alive. But I was destined to become a mere ghost, a mere shadow of who I used to be. This book had twisted my intentions, transforming my wish to protect into a sentence of death. The following day, I found myself sitting alone on the floor of my bedroom, feeling the darkness creeping in, coiling around me like a serpent. I reminisced about my friends and brother, recalling the laughter and the memories we had created together. It dawned on me that I had forsaken them all, and in doing so, I had condemned myself. Mom tried to coax me out of my room, but nothing she said had any effect. As night descended, I sensed the air becoming thick and oppressive. Suddenly I heard whispers, likely from that dreadful book, echoing in my mind, pages shifting as if they were alive. I let out a soft sigh, rising to my feet, and moved to my nightstand where the prophetic pages lay. I began flipping through the book, only to find it completely blank, and I realized I was about to join them. I shut the book and hurled it to the ground, confronting the horrifying truth. I'd become a prisoner of my own decisions, a fate worse than death. As the sudden darkness enveloped me, I grasped the meaning of it all. The real terror did not stem from the foretold deaths, but the isolation I had chose to accept. But now it was too late. I'd become a new edition of the prophetic pages, destined for a solitary conclusion. As I sank into the shadows, I finally understood how to escape the curse of that book. I work as a full-time electrician in a 9-story office building. Most of the floors in it are rented out. The 9th floor is occupied by the company that owns the building. There's also a basement floor, which is underground. It's mostly storage space. Today I got a call from the leasing manager asking me to go to the basement and install additional electronic outlets down there. The tenants, they say, are asking for it. No problem, if that's what's needed. I got into the elevator, pressed the button with the number -1, and began my descent into the basement. The elevator was spacious and clean, and on one of its walls hung a large mirror. As I was riding the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirror, smirking maliciously. I turned my head. Nothing unusual. A normal face was reflected. It mirrored all my facial expressions, as it should. As soon as I turned my head away, I saw a smirk from the corner of my eye. It was unkind. Gave me the creeps. I turned my head sharply in the direction of the mirror a couple of times, but each time the reflection managed to synchronize with my face, showing my dazed eyes. Finally, the elevator stopped, and I noticed an oddity. There were 2 buttons glowing on the scoreboard, 1 and -1. The door slid open, and I got out of the stall a little confused. The elevator left at once. I'd already taken a few steps, but I stopped, as if I had come to the wrong floor. This floor was nothing like the basement. Instead, it copied our 9th floor almost exactly, except for a few details. On our 9th floor, we have a row of windows on the left side as you get out of the elevator. This one had a blank wall. Also, this copy of our office was old, dusty, and completely deserted. It was like no one had been here in years. A pair of dim light fixtures were burning on the ceiling, and a peeling front desk was visible in the half-light. The corridor led down into darkness. Some of the doors were open, but a sepulchral silence enveloped the entire space. I knew all the floors of our building. We certainly didn't have this one. It looked like the 9th floor, but I went down, not up. Where the hell am I? Then I saw the bulletin board that was hanging by the reception desk. On it was a dusty black-framed photograph. Looking closely, I saw that the photo was of Arkady Simonovich, our deputy director. But why was the photo in a black frame? I saw him that day. He was alive and well. There was an oppressive, mystical atmosphere about the place that made me want to escape. What if I stay here forever and the elevator never comes? The thought came to my mind, and my heart raced with terror. I jumped back up to the old worn button and pushed it as hard as I could. It glowed dimly, and the elevator responded with the hum of an electrical motor. It seemed to take forever, but at last the elevator doors opened in front of me. I jumped in like I was in heat. The light in the stall literally blinded me after the darkness of the floor. It seemed as if the elevator had come straight from heaven to take me away. While my eyes were getting used to the light, the elevator brought me to the basement floor, on its own and opened the door. I didn't even have to push the button. "Where did you disappear to?" asked the rental manager, who was waiting for me. "I was in the elevator," I mumbled. "Through Tashkent?" he teased me. I shrugged, and he, seeing my confusion, just showed me where to fix the sockets and ran off on his own. I walked around all day, not knowing what had happened to me. I chalked it up as fatigue. I must have imagined it, I thought to myself, as I went to bed early that night. The next day, the whole floor was buzzing with terrible news. Last night, Arkady Simonovich had been killed in a car crash, and by the evening there was a picture of him in a mourning frame hanging on the notice board in our office. The chain of events completely threw me out of my normal rhythm. I went to work like a zombie. Questions kept reverberating in my mind. How could there be another floor between ground floor and the basement? The floor's slabs are a complete dozen centimeters thick. Why exactly was I there? Maybe it was a hallucination, but then how did I know in advance about the death of the deputy chief? I can't tell anybody. They'll think I'm an idiot. 2 weeks later, I was back on that ground floor. In the morning, the guard from the first floor called and asked to see the switch. He said that it sparked and did not work. So I got in the elevator and pressed the number 1 button. And again, I noticed the elusive smirk in the mirror. The elevator stopped again at floor 0. The doors opened, but I decided not to get out, and pressed all the buttons one by one. The elevator didn't move. It was like it wanted me to get out and see what was there. I took a step out into the corridor, holding the door with my hand. I really didn't want the elevator to go, keeping me in this place. This time, I saw an abandoned copy of the second floor. Everything was dusty, and the walls were shabby. In the semi-darkness of the corridor, I saw a stepladder. It was standing right in the middle of the corridor, about 10 meters away from me. There was a man lying face down on the floor next to it. He wasn't moving, and in the darkness I couldn't recognize him. The elevator started trying to close its doors, so I jumped into the stall. Strangely enough, it moved. It was as if I had done its bidding. After a short ride upward, it let me out on the first floor. I spent the rest of the day like I was in a dream, feeling like I was starting to fall out of reality. Maybe I need to make an appointment with a psychiatrist, I thought, coming home in the evening. All night long I had nightmares of some kind. The next morning, I got a call from the tenant on the second floor, asking me to fix the light fixtures in the hallway. According to them, it was blinking desperately. Taking a stepladder, I went to the second floor. I recently got a job as an electrician in a 9-story office building. The previous electrician had an accident. He was electrocuted while repairing a light fixture in the second floor hallway. I feel sorry for the guy. I like my job. I have my own little office, and the salary isn't bad. Everything is fine, except that I think the mirror in the elevator is kind of weird. The reflection in it smirks sometimes. Or maybe it's just me. Have you ever wondered why certain shows were off limits to you as a child? Probably because of swearing, sexual content, the occasional use of the word penis, right? Well, that is true, but there's a deeper layer than that. For me, anyway. It all started when I was around 6 or so. At this age, I loved to do everything that was exactly the opposite of what I was supposed to do. If you said, "Don't touch the cake" I made for my aunt's wedding, I'd probably end up devouring the entire thing in one sitting. So obviously, when my mother told me not to watch the Adult Swim portion of the Cartoon Network lineup, I made it my goal to watch it every night. I'd gotten away with it for a few nights, Every night I would sit on the floor with the television remote in hand, giggling at how I was getting away with going behind my mother's back. Unfortunately, my fun didn't last forever. I would say I had only been sneaking out to watch the channel for about a week or two before my mother began to catch on. It started with her noticing that my various stuffed animals would be left on the floor in front of the television at night. Then she began to notice that I was more sluggish than usual, a huge sign pointing to the fact that I hadn't been sleeping. But the last straw was when she finally caught me with my face glued to the television screen. I can't recall what was on the screen exactly, but I do remember the word penis being repeated over and over in a chant-like phrase. Looking back, that could have easily been any Adult Swim show that has ever aired. I mean, just the other day I was watching a Mission Hill episode where some pervert whispered the naughty word over and over into a payphone. Who knows? Maybe that's what I was even watching. Anyway, none of that matters now. Really, it didn't matter to me then. All that mattered to me was that I was caught doing something I was strictly forbidden not to do. So, I did what every other 6-year-old caught with her hand in the cookie jar would do. I cried. I could easily attribute all the throat problems I have today to that night. I'm pretty sure I busted a few things in my throat from crying so hard and long, begging for my mother's forgiveness. She stood firm in her decision, giving me an old-fashioned spanking before sending me straight back up to bed. It was always hard to make my mother angry, but once you did, she could be a real witch. Well, at least that's what I thought then. Actually, I appreciate being set right when I was. After that night, I vowed to never watch Adult Swim again. That, of course, was just one of many childhood vows I made to myself, like when I got that stomach ache from eating too much and vowed to never eat chocolate cake again. I probably could have kept my no Adult Swim promise had the shows not kept replaying in my mind. They were so different from the shows my mom let me watch. They were daring and forbidden, something I craved even as a kid. Not only that, but all my friends were watching these types of shows at school, even though we were only in first grade. About a week or so had passed after I had gotten caught. My dad had finally come for a visit. My parents had gotten divorced not too long after I was born, so I only got to see my dad when he would come out for a visit. It was the first time I'd seen him in nearly a year, so I couldn't wait to hear the stories he had to tell. My dad was always on the go with his job, traveling all around the country to chase storms. Why he enjoyed something like that, I'll never know. But to each his own, I suppose. Anyway, after listening to what felt like a never-ending number of stories about tornadoes and other storm phenomena, it was finally my bedtime. Luckily, I wasn't confined to the usual 8:30 curfew when my dad was visiting, so my mom let me stay up as long as I wanted. My dad had always been a pushover when it came to giving me anything I wanted. I think he felt guilty for never being able to see me, except for once every year or two. So, when it was nearing 1 a.m, he had no problem staying up to watch television with me. I sat in front of the TV with a smirk on my face. I knew that my dad would let me watch whatever I wanted, especially since he was an avid fan of nearly every adult cartoon on the market. I even recall wearing his South Park shirt, which easily draped past my feet when I was that age. My mom never liked that too much either, but I chalked it up to her being too protective. Okay, I'm trailing off into My Life the miniseries. Let's get on track. I asked as sweetly and politely as I could, the best pout on my face that I could muster, if we could watch a new show I found. I told him the channel. He didn't hesitate to turn it over, even though I'm positive he knew no kiddie shows were playing at that time of night. I remember receiving a jolt of the same feeling I had prior to my mom pulling the plug on me after hours of television fun. I felt excited, mischievous, and that subtle sense of fear that I always got from watching those cartoons. You have to admit that most of the stuff that plays on those lineups can be pretty scary to a 6-year-old. During the commercial break, I heard my dad snoring his signature snore that could easily be used in place of a foghorn. I was irritated by this, so I slid closer to the TV in order to be able to actually hear the show. I sat there, watching whatever show was on for a few minutes. Started to feel my excitement fade and be replaced by a feeling of paranoia, which I often got when I saw those types of TV shows on television. I kept looking over my shoulder, making sure the characters weren't there. Why? I don't know. I was a sensitive kid, and stupid things would scare me. I do remember the screen cutting from the show and transitioning to a black one, which was perfectly normal for Adult Swim, as they usually began commercials this way, and had many commercials where the logo of the channel is displayed in the black screen. This always caused my heart to stop a little. I hated the feeling of stillness and the silence of those commercials as a kid. It always made me feel uneasy. For some reason, the feeling was a little more intense this time. Not anything that would make you bolt out of your room, but I was sitting in silence with that feeling, growing stronger each second that the logo didn't appear. I noticed it was taking longer than usual, as if the station had gone into dead air. The screen jolted at that point, which I thought was a sign that the logo was going to appear. A logo did, in fact, appear, but it wasn't the logo I'd come to expect from the previous times I'd watched the channel. It was a simple logo, scrolled across the center of the screen with white lines. It wasn't too fancy, but the cleanliness and sharpness of the lines definitely made up for it. It was hard to tell what that logo was at first, as it just seemed to be a bunch of crisscrossing lines held within a thick box. It looked a lot like the National Geographic logo, if it had all its colors drained. As the logo began to fade into black, the sound that you usually hear before most movies in the 90s, I believe it's the THX sound effect, blared. I was surprised it didn't wake my dad. "We now present our feature presentation," a man boomed, sounding a lot like the person that narrated over movies in the theater. You know, the man that tells you to shut off your cell phones and buy a load of popcorn and candy. Instantly, I felt tons better. I figured that this was just how Adult Swim presented their movies. And after a day of watching nothing but Disney, I was excited to see the shows and movies all my first grade friends got to watch. The only thing I could think about was bragging to my friends that I'd seen an adult movie on the Forbidden Channel, not to be mistaken with porn, of course. The movie started with little droplets falling from a darkening sky. In the mixture of the translucent rain were droplets of scarlet, which was supposed to be blood, although it looked much more like the paint that's packaged in those old paint-by-the-numbers. Then again, you can't really expect much more than that from a low-budget Adult Swim film. Plus, blood wasn't exactly rare amongst their programs. It was just another reason why my mom didn't allow me to watch the station. After the shower of rain and blood, one of the main characters could be seen from a bird's eye view. His hair was a rich and vibrant purple color. However, the color was fading. The rain seemed to be washing it away, as you could clearly see purple dribbles sliding down the character's body. The scene cut to a close-up of the character's face. It was a young woman cartoon character. Her eyes were nothing more than slits of black, resembling an electrical outlet. Actually, she herself resembled a huge electrical outlet, which was carried along by tiny sticks for legs and arms. Imagine the legs and arms from SpongeBob SquarePants and Frankendoodle. That's the best way I know how to describe it. Her pitiful excuse for an arm lifted upward, the camera panning up the span of the stick, zooming upwards until you could see a glass window. For whatever reason, her reflection wasn't present in the window. But as a kid, I didn't give that much thought. Perhaps if I'd paid attention to that detail, it would have unnerved me more than it did. While I felt a little frightened by the sharp camera angles, overly simplified character design, and the eerie piano music droning in the background, I was still determined to watch the movie in its entirety. I didn't want to face another day of school of being called mama's boy and chicken because I hadn't been watching things that were far out of my age range. The piano music seemed like it was coming from one of those old busted record players. In fact, it was. The camera panned up to the window. It steadily began to fade into the glass. It wasn't showing the contents of the room beyond the window. It was actually showing the inside of the glass. Once inside the window, you could see an overweight character drawn far differently from the female outlet. He almost resembled Santa Claus, having a long white mustache jutting from his upper lip and curling at the ends, rosy red cheeks that looked as though they'd burn your hands if you touched them, twinkling baby blue eyes that glistened as if they were made of glass themselves. This detailed drawing of a rip-off Santa Claus stood next to a table that was considerably out of proportion for him. Sitting on the table was an old record player. The base was fashioned from a beautiful block of wood, detailed with small bits of gold. The man turned the crank on the side of the box, creating that music that sent chills through my bones. At 6, I was used to things like Mary Had a Little Lamb, not the type of music that was played at funerals. Turn the crank, he suddenly sputtered as the camera zoomed into his hand, turning the crank. The motions were agonizingly slow, forcing me to really feel the stillness of the movements. Turn the crank. I was beginning to feel less thrilled and more anxious. I took a moment to slide closer to the couch, where my dad was fast asleep, completely oblivious to the content on the television. While I slid, a long cranking sound was heard. It dragged on for what felt like a lifetime, growing louder and louder as it continued. I turned back to the screen when the sound caught my attention. The crank that the unnamed character was turning was being wound tighter and tighter, straining the gorgeous wooden base. The base began to reveal tiny cracks as the crank turned. The crank grew larger, the sound grew louder, and the crank grew weaker. Turn the crank, the cheery man shouted with a creepy, joyous voice. I could only assume he had a smile on his face, but the only thing the camera would show was the record player slowly collapsing in on itself. Turn the crank. My eyes were beginning to fill with tears. I remembered how loud noises would always upset me when I was younger. I was an odd child. Neither silence nor noise pleased me. If it was too silent, I would be scared. If it was too noisy, I'd be equally scared. Fortunately for me, this movie had already manipulated both of those childhood fears. My teary eyes widened as the next scene of the movie took place. The beautiful record player finally gave out, the crank breaking apart into the jolly man's hand. The remaining bits of the record player began to sputter in a violent amount of smoke, which surprisingly only hovered around it, leaving every inch of the room untouched. No more must I turn the crank, the man whispered, the camera focusing on his face, and his face alone. His cheery-colored cheeks were growing pale, and his glimmering eyes began to lose their luster. Suddenly, those once sparkling blue eyes shattered, shards of glass falling to the floor. I was surprised that they didn't fling into the screen. They just sort of fell from the man's eye sockets. I later figured that the rain at the start of the film had actually been the glass falling from his face. The lonesome girl has finally sank. The screen cut to an abrupt moment of darkness, but only long enough to fade into a new scene. There was another bird's eye view of the street, where the female character had been walking at the beginning of the film. There were shards of glass completely coating the street below. All you could see were the very tops of some of the buildings, which were all tinted with a very rusty shade of crimson because of the massive amounts of broken glass. The camera began to lower the view, zooming in by showing choppily cut frames, each one closer to the mess than the last. As the last frame was presented, I could see the outlet-like character from the beginning, laying motionless in the midst of the glassy area. The shards that surrounded her body were a pale shade of purple, obviously caused by the color that had completely drained from her hair. By this point, I was bawling my eyes out. I may have been young, but I knew what a dead person looked like. I knew for sure that girl was dead. No one could survive being pelted by such an enormous amount of glass like that. The scene changed at that point, showing a close-up of an hourglass. The camera was slowly, gently pulling away from the hourglass, which had grains of sand sliding through its midsection. Kind of reminded me of that soap opera, Days of Our Lives. I'm sure you soap junkies know what I'm talking about. Only it was much more grim and against a colorless background. "She's perfectly fine. Now don't you fret. Thanks for watching my show, kids, but you're not out of hell yet." At that point, I let out such a scream that my throat was still sore the next day. The scream was so sharp that it even forced my dad to bolt upright. He sat up to check on me, accidentally shifting his elbow onto the TV remote, causing the channel to change. What I saw when the channel changed made me even more confused than I already was. The logo for Adult Swim flashed on the screen, and the next show started. It was as if the television hadn't been on Cartoon Network at all that night. My dad apologized for accidentally switching the channel, hitting the recall button on the remote. I was too busy sobbing with fear to stop him. When the channel finally returned to the station that aired that supposed movie, a message popped up on the screen. "Programming not authorized. Please confirm you are subscribed to the channel or unplug your receiver to resolve the issue. If you continue to see this error, please contact your cable provider. We apologize for any inconvenience." The channel was apparently some type of late-night movie network, exclusively for subscribed viewers. But that didn't explain how I was able to watch an entire film on an unauthorized channel. How it got on that channel, I have no clue. I guess it's possible my dad may have bumped the remote in his sleep, but I think I would have noticed the channel changing. Instead, I only noticed an Adult Swim show leaving for commercials and then returning with that hideous film. I slept in my mom's bed that night, trying to block the image of the film strip out of my mind. The next morning, I could hear my mom loudly discussing not letting me watch late-night television with my dad. Looking back on that night nowadays, the film wasn't half as bad as most of the animes, crime shows, or twisted cartoons and morbid comics I was exposed to. I guess I was just being silly and childish. But all children have horrifying experiences that wouldn't even make them flinch as adults. Even though I've seen far worse, that film left a bad impression in my mind. I mean, I still enjoy watching Adult Swim to this day, and now I can do it without getting in trouble, but I'm definitely on high alert for anything overly suspicious. Not only with Adult Swim, but with late-night movie showings in general. I have no interest in seeing that film again, but I'm curious about its title. I'd like to know the name so I can research any portions of the film I may have missed and possibly discover the voice actor behind the demonic Santa-like man. Maybe you guys can help me with that. I was 7 when I moved into that house at Ashbrook Lane. At least that's what my parents tell me. My recollection of that time is vague. I have memories of the big tree on our lawn, running round and round the garden with the boy next door, and I remember sitting on the living room floor playing with my He-Man figures. But my most vivid memories are of the reoccurring nightmares. To the best of my knowledge, they happened every night I stayed in that house. The first time I woke during the early hours with a feeling that somebody was in the room with me, lurking amidst the darkness, watching me. I lay there rigid and screwed up my eyes tightly, hoping it would pass me by. I felt the bed shake and I stiffened up like a statue, afraid to make even the slightest movement. I heard this raspy breathing from the foot of my bed. It moved round the side of me, then stopped. Moments passed silently. Then I felt his breath on my face. Instinctively, I opened my eyes and saw an emaciated man in a lab coat looming over me, an expression of horror etched into his pale, gaunt face, veins bulging from his forehead. I tried to scream, but he grasped me by the throat with his skeletal fingers and dragged me out of bed. Flailing and contorting, I tried to grab on to something to stop him from taking me. He dragged me out of my room and onto the landing, where I gripped onto the stair rail. He pulled at my arms and then at my feet, and I kicked and screamed in a furious fright for my freedom. The next thing I knew, it was morning, and I was waking up in my parents' bed. They'd found me sleepwalking across the landing in the middle of the night. I had a lot of nightmares as a kid, which they put down to my active imagination, but sleepwalking, that was a first. I saw that gaunt prowler again the following night. Again, he clasped his hand around my throat before yanking me from my bed. He managed to pull me down the stairs before I kicked myself free of his grip. I heard a chime coming from the grandfather clock in the hallway and found myself waking up in my parents' bed. My dad had woken up in the night and found me laying at the foot of the stairs. Another sleepwalking incident, I guess. I worked myself into such a panic over these dreams that my parents allowed me to stay up late with them one night. We watched TV as I fought to stay awake, terrified of the dreams that awaited me. I didn't remember going to bed that night. I just found myself sitting on the floor, waiting for the time to arrive. The grandfather clock stood in the hallway, ticking away the minutes. Suddenly, a part of the wall opened up to reveal a concealed doorway from which he emerged. He was wearing the same lab coat I'd seen him wear before, only this time it was smeared with blood. Whatever he'd been doing inside that room, I didn't want to find out. I watched with dread as he slowly and methodically slipped a pair of rubber surgical gloves onto his hands. He tinted his fingers together, then turned and looked directly at me with this intense, deep-set stare. A pained grimace stretched across his chalky face. I rushed upstairs, calling out for help, as he crawled behind me, swiping at my heels. I ran into my parents' bedroom. They were asleep and unaware of the commotion. Before I could reach their bed and shake them awake, my pursuer snatched me up with his bony arms and started pulling me away. I managed to grab onto the door frame, and despite his efforts, he could not pry me from it. He relented for a moment, his breath heavy and labored against my neck. Slowly he reached into his pocket and withdrew a scalpel before slicing deeply into my hand. I released my grip on the door frame as blood dripped between my fingers. I shrieked out, but there was no sound. I could see Mom and Dad lying there fast asleep, oblivious to this withered specter hauling me out of their room and all the way to the bottom of the stairs. I tried to claw my way back, leaving streaks of blood over the carpet and walls in my wake. He pressed his fingers against my throat. I whimpered and choked, and My limbs thrashed around in frenzy. At that moment, the grandfather clock in the hallway let out a single chime, and he suddenly abandoned his fight. I looked up to see the emaciated figure creeping back through the secret doorway from which it had emerged. The door sealed shut, disappearing into the wall as though it never existed. A point came where I started to confuse my dreams with reality. I couldn't tell if this was all in my mind or actually happening to me in the middle of the night. During the daylight hours, I examined the wall in the hallway, looking to see if there was some indication of a secret door. I told my parents and my Nan about the dreams, and though I never doubted their concern, there was not a lot they could do except reassure me. I stayed with my parents when I got particularly distressed, either in their bed or we'd bring the blankets and pillow downstairs and have a sleepover in the living room. Nothing helped. My tormentor found me night after night, waiting until my mom and dad were asleep before hauling me away towards that concealed door. I tried to call out, but my screams were always silenced as he gripped his hands around my throat. He grew increasingly violent. Sometimes he would use his scalpel across my hands or under my fingernails. Other times he would inject me with a syringe, and it wasn't unusual for him to bite my fingers. As I prepared for the dreams, I rehearsed how I would try to fight him off, what I could grab onto as he dragged me downstairs. I knew if I could just hold out until the clock chimed, then I would survive another night, because that's when his door sealed shut. What terrified me most was the realization that if he got me into that secret room before the chime of the clock, the door would seal behind us, and nobody would ever see or hear from me again. I don't remember much else about that house, but we didn't stay long. We moved in with my Nan for a while, and even though there wasn't much room for all of us, at least those nightmares stopped. So did the sleepwalking. Of course, I never forgot about those dreams. How could I? But I figured I was just a kid with an overactive imagination, and I never considered them particularly abnormal. That is, until my teens, when I started suspecting something more sinister was at play. I was looking through old photo albums with my parents when we came across some of our old house at Ashbrook Lane. Something wasn't right about that house, I heard my mom say to my dad. This roused my curiosity. What do you mean, Mom? Well, I used to have bad feelings and nightmares when we were living there, she added. Dad tried to change the subject, but I persisted. What sort of nightmares? I inquired. I don't want to go into it, just violent and disturbing dreams. I had reoccurring nightmares in that house too, I said. You were too young to remember your dreams, my dad interrupted. You probably just picked up on something you heard us talking about. I felt insulted, like they were dismissing me, but you don't forget dreams like those. I tried pushing for more information, but they weren't forthcoming. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that we were able to talk about it again. I was in the living room with my parents, and my dad was reading the paper. He casually told my mom, "Our old house in Ashbrook Lane is up for sale again." "I'm not surprised. Nobody stays there long," she replied. "It makes you wonder." My dad nodded in agreement. "So what exactly happened in that house?" I interjected. Maybe it was because so much time had passed, or perhaps it's because I was older, but they were more open with me this time. My mom explained how she'd had visions of dead bodies lying on the floor, blood all over the walls, and she claimed she'd felt a presence. While alone, she would often hear crying from inside the house. She also revealed that my aunt and uncle had come to stay one weekend and woke up in the middle of the night to see a figure of a tall man wandering through the house. My aunt and uncle had passed away by this time, so I was unable to ask them about the experience. But Mom explained that they were so distressed by the incident that they returned home the next day. I asked Dad, "Did you have anything happen to you?" My dad had always been a very grounded skeptic, but I knew something had affected him too, though he wouldn't admit it. There was just an uncomfortable feeling, he said, and volunteered nothing more. Ever since learning of my mom, aunt, and uncle's experience in that house, I've been overwhelmed with curiosity. Like my dad, I'm quite the skeptic, and I was convinced there was a rational explanation for all this. Even so, I wanted to know more about that house. From time to time, I would check the newspapers, and just as my parents had said, the house was rarely occupied for more than 6 months before going up for sale. There wasn't much more I could find out at this time. I'm sure the information and the history is available in some archive somewhere, but I wouldn't know where to start. However, I was passing by that area one day and got the idea to drive by the house. It was unoccupied. I noted down the phone number on the for sale sign, and later that day, I called the estate agent and requested a viewing. The lady who met me for the viewing introduced herself as Andrea. We went inside, and immediately I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was probably my mind running away from me, but I got this eerie feeling. I can only describe it as being like the tension that lingers in the air after a big argument. If I'm honest, I barely recognized the interior of the house. My memory was vague, but there was one area that brought to mind those reoccurring nightmares, and that was the hallway. I continued the tour as Andrea gave me her sales pitch. As we walked around, I was convinced that the wall in the hallway was hiding something. "What's behind this wall?" I asked. The look on her face at that moment could disguise none of the lies she proceeded to tell me. It wasn't my intention to make her uncomfortable, but I really wanted some answers. She started mumbling awkwardly about an old boiler room that had been bricked over. She stopped mid-sentence. "You know something about this house, don't you?" she asked, in a tone of surrender. "I used to live here as a kid," I explained. "Something isn't right about this house, is it?" Although still apprehensive, it was as if I had freed her from an eternal silence. It could cost me my job if I told you." "Can't be much worse than what I already suspect," I said. "Was somebody murdered here, behind this wall?" I'd put her on edge. She took a cautious glance over her shoulder. "Do you mind if we talk about this somewhere else? I'm really not comfortable talking about it here." We decided to go for coffee, and that is where I learned. In 1953, Dr. Henry Fenton moved into Ashbrook Lane with his wife, Mary, and their teenage son, Raymond. The upper floor would serve as their living quarters, and he had the lower part of the house to convert into his doctor practice. His office was just off the hallway, opposite which stood his prized grandfather clock. Things were going well for the Fentons, and business was thriving. Then, one day, Mary fell down the stairs in their home and broke her neck. She died instantly. Henry reacted to the tragedy by immersing himself in his work, using his practice as a distraction from his heartache. Raymond, on the other hand, was struggling to come to terms with his mother's death. With his father too busy to offer the emotional support he needed, he started to drift. He fell in with a bad crowd, started skipping school, experimenting with drugs, and there were a couple of times he'd been caught drinking or brawling and was escorted home by the police. Henry barely noticed or cared about his son's trouble during this time. Once he closed his practice for the day, he would collapse into his armchair and attempt to repress his grief with liquor. Some nights he'd drink himself into a coma. Other nights he'd fly into a rage, smashing furniture and throwing things around the room. Sometimes it was his son who bore the brunt of this temper. Raymond was taken in by his grandparents soon after, leaving Henry Fenton all alone in that house on Ashbrook Lane. Later that year, on a cold autumn night, Henry was woken by a disturbance downstairs. Emboldened by the liquor, he decided to go and confront the intruder. His practice was the only thing he had going for him, and he refused to let some thugs take it away. Henry tiptoed into the darkness. He saw the light of a torch from the far room and heard the intruders rummaging through the cupboards and shelves. It was probably some junkies, after the drugs and syringes he kept on the premise. Henry snuck into his office, withdrew a scalpel from the drawer, tucked himself into a dark corner, and waited. The intruder entered the room, a rucksack over his shoulder, and his face covered by a black mask. Henry sprung out of the darkness and brandished the scalpel, ordering him to drop the bag. The masked man panicked and lunged towards him, attempting to push past him and make his escape. Henry swiped out blindly as he fell backwards against the wall. The intruder staggered along the hallway and opened the front door before collapsing on the doorstep. Henry got to his feet and approached the fallen man. Blood gushed from a deep incision across his throat, from where the scalpel had made contact. Henry pushed the mask from the man's face to clear his airway. Staring back at him in the moonlight, eyes wide with terror, Henry saw the face of his son, Raymond. His heart wrenched at the sight before him. What had he done? How could he have known? His professional instinct kicked in, and he sprung into action. Raymond thrashed about, choking and gurgling on his own blood, as his father gripped his throat, pressing his bony fingers firmly against the wound in an attempt to contain the bleeding. He proceeded to drag him to his office, where he would clamp and stitch the laceration. But by the time he got there, it was too late. At that moment, the grandfather clock in the hallway let out a single chime. Patients turned up to the practice the following day to find Raymond cradled in Dr. Fenton's arms. Unable to come to terms with killing his own son, Henry had turned the scalpel upon himself, slashing his own wrists before bleeding to death on the floor of his office. Somewhere in Columbus, Ohio, there lived a young boy. Josh was always a normal child, always doing normal things. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Inside, Josh always felt alone. His father was a cocaine addict, and his mother was not too bright. Keeping to himself in his room, playing with his many toys they bought to occupy him, it always felt so empty. That was when Josh wished for a friend. When Josh was 6, he spent most of his time in the bathroom, playing with the water, or in his bedroom, playing with his toys. One day, a large mirror on the inside of the bathroom door caught his attention. It was himself. He knew that. He always knew that, but there was something about him that was different. His appearance didn't move and smile like he did. The mirror was a long mirror, about half the size of the door, and could easily show his full stature. It was the middle of the afternoon. His mother was sleeping. His father was at work, when the young boy he was looking at spoke to him. "Want to play?" Josh didn't know what to make of it. He didn't feel scared, but it all felt so real to him. The reality overtook him as the boy seemed to move from the mirror in front of him. Josh just smiled like usual and nodded his head. The boy led himself to Josh's room, where the ground was cluttered with his toys. This allowed the two to laugh and play together with ease. Over the next few months, Josh's parents always noticed the loud noises coming from Josh in his room, always talking to himself, toys moving around as he played. His parents asked who he was talking to or was playing with, several times assuming he had an imaginary friend, but Josh always answered with absolute certainty, "His name's Jacob." Over the next 2 years, Josh had been focusing more on cartoons and real-life friends than playing with Jacob. Sometimes, when Josh wasn't home, his mother could hear toys dropping upstairs. Jacob didn't appear too often, but there was always a sign that he was there, and Josh was beginning to fear his room. Josh was afraid of even being near upstairs if he was alone. When Josh turned 9, a lot of things started going wrong. He was beginning to feel others' emotions easily. However, it wasn't like empathy. It was more like feeling sympathy and sorrow. Josh was already showing signs of anxiety because of his fears, and now this new turn was worrying everyone around him. No one believed that he had a friend in his own room. Although his father didn't believe him, his father could sense the adamant fear within Josh's eyes whenever he was forced to go to his room alone. Josh had forced himself to sleep in the living room that year. In the fall, Josh entered 4th grade and was beginning to forget about his young friend. That was when the nightmares began. They were nothing serious at first. Things disappearing, his pets dying, his friends leaving. Things that one day did happen, and not too far-fetched either. But not in the way they were shown. His dreams were over-exaggerated, a lot more gory and frightening for a child his age to think up, but he kept their existence to himself. Weeks passed, and the dreams got more intense as his birthday passed. The next year coming around, and everything went by normally. In March, the dreams began again, except this time, it showed his father. It showed someone breaking in and killing him, repeatedly mutilating his body until there was nothing left. The next day, his mother and father got into a large fight, but nothing too different. There was just so much negative energy in the air. It was as if anger and rage itself were filling the house. Still, Josh was scared of his dream and begged his mother to stay home, though she ignored his pleas. Earlier that day, Josh's uncle had dropped off a computer for his father to fix up. It was so that Josh could have it for school and socializing. Josh's father had stayed up late to finish it after Josh had fallen asleep on the living room floor. A small mattress from a pull-out couch was laid across the floor so he could rest peacefully. The next morning, Josh woke up. His morning cartoons were over, and he was almost late for school. The first thing he did was try to wake his father up, screaming at him for making him miss his cartoons. Josh's father didn't wake up. No matter how many times his small hands pushed his father's body, rocking it back and forth, he didn't move, screaming, "Daddy, Daddy," over and over, before noticing a pale gray bubble forming around his lips. Out of instinct, Josh ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife, protruding the bubble and breaking it open. The foam moved, but his father still wasn't breathing. His mother worked night shift and would be home within the hour, and his mind couldn't even think about the police. His mom was the only thing running through his mind as he ran up the steps, his fear disappearing as he rummaged through his room for the phone book to call the number his mother had left him. Returning downstairs, Josh called the number, but she was already on her way home. Still in his pajamas, Josh walked outside and sat on the front step. He wasn't crying anymore. He just couldn't. He couldn't tell how long it took his mother to come home, but the moment she drove into the driveway, she could tell something was wrong. Asking Josh what was wrong, he replied in a single monotone voice, over and over again, "Dad's dead. Dad's dead. Dad's dead." Running inside, she found his father's corpse on the floor. Josh walked in slowly, keeping still, watching as she fumbled for the phone to call the police. crying for him to come back, crying for him to be okay. Josh just stood there, his eyes watching the scene. It wasn't long before the police and the medics arrived. They said his father had not, in fact, died in his sleep, but had fallen. He'd had a heart attack and a stroke at the same time, as if something scared him. While the medics were there, Josh sat at the top of the steps, looking down. He swore he could hear Jacob's laughter, however, drowned out by the people. As the medic left, one thing bore into Josh's mind, as the medic spoke loud enough so that he could hear. If your son knew CPR, he could have saved his life. Desperation took hold of Josh from that point on. Things leaving and dying around him, disappearing. None of it could even be explained, and anyone that dated him stated that something told them to leave. Josh was forever cursed, haunted by that little boy from the mirror. The little boy now trapped within himself, forever watching his very step. If you're ever lonely, never try to play with yourself. As I stood at the entrance of the amusement park, I could feel the excitement bubbling inside me. The vibrant colors flashed all around, and the joyful sounds of laughter filled the air, making it impossible not to smile. My parents had poured years into this place, spending countless hours programming and developing robots for the rides and attractions. But today was something special. I was finally old enough to drop by during their work shift, and I could barely contain my eagerness to see what they had been up to. Walking through the park gates, the sweet smell of cotton candy and popcorn wrapped around me, instantly transporting me back to my childhood. Bright posters advertising the latest rides caught my attention, but my heart raced at the thought of seeing my parents' creations up close. I'd always had this fascination with technology, and the robots my parents built were no exception. Weaving through the bustling crowd, admiring the various attractions, I finally made my way to the robotics center. I swung open the door and was met with a chaotic scene. Wires everywhere, screens blinking, and half-assembled robots scattered about. I headed straight for the central area, where I knew Mom and Dad would be. And they were there, both intensely focused on a small, humanoid robot, tweaking its limbs while its body lay on the table. "Hey, Mom, Dad," I came out, trying to grab their attention. My voice barely broke through the whirring of their machines and the sound of saws cutting, but I was sure they'd heard me. I shouted their name again, and this time they paused and looked up, turning around, their faces lighting with smiles that chased away their fatigue. Mom had her hair in a messy bun, wiping her eyes on her work apron as she came over to give me a warm hug. Dad adjusted his glasses and followed Mom, affectionately ruffling my hair. "Robbie, we're so glad you could come. We've been working on something special, a robot to help guests navigate the amusement park," Mom explained. Pointing to the robot they were assembling, I could see how much effort they'd put into it. "It's not quite going as we'd hoped. We might have to send it to the robot graveyard," Dad said, his frustration evident. Mom and Dad started to debate. One thought the robot graveyard was a terrible idea, while the other was convinced it was the best solution. Just then, the door swung open, and I called out to my parents, who immediately stopped their arguing. I instinctively covered my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was to come next. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I scare you three?" a concerned voice asked. I lowered my hands and saw a woman with thick black hair in a worker's uniform standing there, nervously smiling at us. It was clear she felt awkward about interrupting. I thought you were some sort of rogue robot, I joked. I truly apologize for the scare. I'm not a rogue robot, just someone who works here, the woman replied. Linda, we specifically told you to knock before entering the robotics center. You startled us, Dad said, sounding annoyed. Sir, I'm really sorry. I forgot about the knocking rule. But who is this? Linda asked, her gaze landing on me, clearly not having met me before. Oh, this is our son Robert. He's visiting us for a few days, Mom said, beaming with pride. It's nice to meet you, Robert, Linda said, extending her hand for a handshake. I took it, letting her know she could call me Robbie if she wanted. Is there something you needed? My wife and I are pretty busy, Dad asked. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Sanders, one of the main cameras in the security office malfunctioned, and I was sent to get one of you to figure it out, Linda exclaimed. Oh, come on. I'm sorry about this, Julie. You stay here and fix that robot part. And Robert, you stick with your mom. I guess we can't give you the grand tour of the amusement park like we planned. You'll just have to wait here for a bit, Dad said. Patting my shoulder and kissing Mom on the cheek, he rushed off out of the robotics center to fix the broken camera. Mom and Dad didn't just create and repair the amusement park robots. They also helped out whenever something else broke down or malfunctioned. I let out a soft sigh and closed my arms, noticing that Linda was still there with me. She cleared her throat, catching my attention. I could give you a tour of the amusement park. I've worked here for 10 years, and I'm sure your parents won't mind. Trust me, I know this place like the back of my hand, Linda said. I guess, if Mom is okay with that, I replied, glancing over at her. Well, your dad and I did promise you a tour, but I want you to listen to Linda and be on your best behavior. If your father comes back before you return, I'll let him know you're with her, Mom said. Linda announced that the tour was starting, and I followed her out of the robotics center as she began to share the history of the robots. My parents had already told me about the history of the robots they built, but I didn't mind hearing it again from someone else. Once we stepped into the main area of the amusement park, Linda pointed out various attractions and rides, giving me a little backstory on each. Suddenly, I stopped in my tracks, noticing a massive dome-shaped building all by itself. It looked so old that I felt like it could topple over if someone kicked it. Hey, what's that, Linda? I asked, pointing at the building. Linda's face went pale as she turned to see what I was pointing at. Oh, no, that's the robot graveyard. Nobody's allowed in there. Not even you, okay? She said, her voice serious. I chuckled, thinking she was joking. I'd heard about the robot graveyard, a forbidden area that was off limits. The graveyard was said to be on the outskirts of the park, filled with all the malfunctioning robots my parents had worked on. People often said it was the graveyard of once great machines, and it intrigued me endlessly because I wondered what secrets lay beyond those rusty doors. Seriously, you really shouldn't go in there. Your parents have heard about, strange things happening in that building. So stay away, Linda added, her tone now more urgent. Yeah, I'm not scared of some old junk robots, I shrugged off her warning. Look, I know you're old enough to take care of yourself, but just be careful, and remember what your parents said. Listen to me. Plus, you're going to be here all day, and if you want excitement, there's plenty to see, Linda said, trying to convince me. I nodded, but my mind was already wandering. I couldn't shake the allure of the robot graveyard. I wanted to see it for myself, to explore the forgotten remnants of my parents' creations. A couple of hours after exploring all the rides and attractions, my curiosity got the best of me. I felt compelled to check out the robot graveyard. I told Linda I needed to hit the restroom, and she said she'd hang out by the snack stand while I took a quick dash. But as I started walking, I had a change of heart. The sound of laughter and rides began to fade, replaced by the heavy silence that settled around me. Without saying a word, I quickly made my way to the robot graveyard, glancing around nervously to ensure that no one, especially Linda, was watching. Once I was sure the coast was clear, I reached for the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it creaked open, startling me. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this, I thought, a wave of anxiety washing over me. But my anxiety about what lay inside pushed me forward, and without a second thought, I stepped into the robot graveyard, only to find it cloaked in complete darkness. I fumbled around, searching for something to light the way. As I brushed my hand against the wall, I flipped a switch that surprisingly turned on the lights. Why would the lights even work in a place like this, if my parents hardly ever come here? I asked myself. The robot graveyard sprawled before me, a flat expanse littered with robot parts and half-buried machines. Even with the lights on, the room felt heavy as I stepped inside, sending a chill up my spine. I walked past heaps of components, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and fear. The remnants of robots lay scattered, some still intact, their once bright eyes now dull. Others were just twisted metal shells, and I felt like an intruder in a forsaken place. Yet, a thrill of excitement surged within me. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a large, collapsed structure that seemed to have once housed a gigantic robot. Its shadow loomed over me, pulling me in with its irresistible allure. Unable to resist, I stepped through the crumbling doorway, my breath hitching in my throat. Inside, the air was thick with dust and a faint scent of oil. Dim light seeped through the cracks in the walls, casting an eerie glow on the scattered machinery and tools strewn across the floor. I moved cautiously, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the stillness. As I ventured deeper, an odd sensation enveloped me, a creeping unease that I was not alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I spun around, expecting to find someone behind me. But there was nothing, just the heavy silence of the graveyard. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath me, and I stumbled, grabbing onto a nearby wall for support. A low humming filled the air, sending another chill racing down my spine. I turned to escape, but the doorway I had entered through was now a solid wall of rusted metal. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped. I frantically searched for another way out, but the walls felt like they were closing in on me. The humming grew louder, and I could hear whispers drifting through the darkness. Unclear, yet filled with a chilling urgency. As I moved around, I spotted numerous robot parts scattered about. Arms, legs, even a head, all still, silent, and unblinking. While I was trying to navigate, something coiled around my ankle. I looked down to see a robot's upper half gripping me. It had no legs, but its head was intact, and I could see concern in its eyes, an expression only a robot could convey. "You must save us," it croaked weakly. "Save you? From what?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The robot master is going to destroy us all," the robot part replied. But, I stammered, anxiety creeping in. "You have to help us," it insisted. Without thinking twice, I kicked the robot off my ankle and bolted deeper into the graveyard. I stopped in a large, empty area surrounded by piles of scrap, and instinctively realized I shouldn't have come here. Then, a sinister robot laugh echoed from behind me. I turned around to see a large robot, way larger than me, parts of its human-like skin missing, revealing the cold metallic face beneath. "Greetings, human. Do you appreciate what you see?" it asked, its voice chilling. "Who are you?" I asked, backing away slowly. "I am the robot master, and humans are not allowed here," it declared. I stepped back, my breath quickening, but the robot continued to advance. "You are not supposed to be here. You do not belong." I spun around and ran, desperately seeking an escape. The walls seemed to close in, shadows twisting into monstrous shapes that reached out for me. The robot's voice echoed in my mind, a chaotic blend of warning and despair. "Get him, my pets," commanded the robot master, gesturing towards me. The parts began to move closer, and I dashed through the maze of components. Then I realized the door was blocked by the lower half of a robot. "Obey, obey, obey," the parts chanted. I stumbled through the graveyard, my heart pounding in my ears, the whirring of machinery behind me, their chanting drowning out my thoughts. I felt a cold, metallic hand grip my ankle, dragging me down. "No, please," I shouted in panic. I managed to shake off the robot hand and stomped on it for good measure, ensuring it wouldn't follow me. Without another word, I burst through the building's doors and slammed them shut behind me. I could hear the chanting and the banging from the other side, but I just stood there, breathless. I need to find Mom and Dad and tell them what happened, I thought. With a deep breath, I sprinted towards the robotics center, weaving through the crowd. When I arrived, I saw Linda and a few workers deep in conversation. "You need to help me," I shouted. All the workers stopped talking, and when they turned to look at me, Linda's face lit up. "Robbie, there you are! I thought I lost you. These guys were trying to help me find you," she exclaimed. I know, I should have told you. I went into the robot graveyard building, and now all the robot parts..." I paused to catch my breath. "Wait a minute, you went into the robot graveyard? You're not supposed to go in there. It's dangerous," one of the male workers said, sounding genuinely concerned. Suddenly, Linda and the others surrounded me, all talking at once. I couldn't handle it after everything that had just happened. "Stop! Please stop!" I yelled, my voice rising. I covered my ears with my hands because the noise was overwhelming, piercing through my mind. I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my ears, and it wouldn't let up. But no one was listening. The workers kept shouting and talking over each other about what had just happened. Then, out of nowhere, a jolt coursed through my body, and I blacked out. My hands fell away from my ears, and I felt myself bending forward. "Everyone clear the area, step back," Mr. Sanders shouted. Linda and the men stepped back as Mr. Sanders approached the robot child, letting out a soft sigh. Noticing Mr. Sanders' concern for the damaged robot, Linda felt a wave of sadness wash over her. "Mr. Sanders, what happened to the robot child?" she asked. Without saying a word, Mr. Sanders moved to the back of the robot and lifted the shirt from its rear. He opened the component panel, peering inside at the array of buttons and wires, and spotted something that made him sigh deeply. "It looks like the main obedience chip malfunctioned, which is why it didn't follow our commands and ended up in the robot graveyard when we told it not to. I'll take it to the robot center and my wife and I will repair it," Mr. Sanders explained. He instructed Linda to inform his wife about the robot situation, and she nodded before hurrying into the robotics center. "What will happen to your robot?" one of the men asked. "Don't worry. This robot will be as good as new by the time my wife and I have fixed it up," Mr. Sanders replied, grinning at the men. Mr. Sanders picked up the robot child and tossed it over his shoulder. Without saying a word, he headed back into the robot center, ready to team up with Mrs. Sanders and bring their creation back to life.